Sounds like the cruise ship from hell and harks back to the pandemic. 5,000 passengers stuck at sea, no port calls, food rationing, plumbing problems, contaminated water. Reportedly, this is the case aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, a supercarrier involved in the war with Iran, operating in a heavily contested combat zone, launching fighter jets day and night while bolstering air and naval blockades. The sailors are also allegedly battling exhaustion, low morale and mental health issues. Families of the crew have gone public with the complaints, worried their loved ones are being pushed to the edge. Sailors say they had to stop a shipmate from jumping overboard. The Pentagon denies all this, but there's an investigation underway into another sailor going overboard. Is this the new leverage Tehran has been waiting for? Is Trump's campaign crumbling? Experts have said the Iranians can hold out longer than the Americans. Let's see what Jonathan Hackett has to say. He's a Marine Corps Special Operations veteran. Is this what you get when a president doesn't have a concrete plan and sends ships halfway around the world to start a forever war?
Certainly, it seems that the effects at sea now are a result of lack of prior planning that could have probably reduced, if not eliminated, the challenges we're seeing today with a ship out at sea over 250 days, coming into port only twice in those 250 days at locations where there was no liberty for the sailors and Marines aboard the vessel. That means they've really been at work for 250 days. And as you mentioned, these 5,000 people are not really passengers. They're actually working every single day. So imagine you're on this cruise for 250 days and you're also working every day, 10 to 12 hours a day, getting no rest, having high expectations in wartime, and being expected to operate at your maximum capability, even today on day 250 or 251. It's really tough to imagine in their shoes.
Is this a metaphor for the state of the US's war on Iran or just the plain reality?
What we see with this extended time period certainly looks like goalposts being moved down the field. And that is what appears to be happening with the conflict as well, where there were certain expectations back on February 28th, when this war was started by the United States and by Israel, that it would be over very quickly. We don't know exactly how long quickly means in this context, but it certainly probably was not this long. And it seems to be going on longer. And as you mentioned, the regime in Iran is banking on this lasting as long as possible, especially past the November midterm elections in the United States and the October elections in Israel, where both of those elections could actually benefit the regime if there is a more dovish leader that comes into power in particular locations within the United States and Israel.
So what sort of pressure is this heaping on the administration over the Iran war?
Well, there's certainly pressure from every direction, not just from those who want conflict to end, hostilities to end, but also on those who are having a hard time to afford basic goods and basic services. And of course, the cost of fuel is dramatically affected, not just in the United States, which has its own ability to produce oil, but other countries in the world that are highly dependent on this particular waterway. And so there's pressure from partners in Europe, partners in Southeast Asia, Japan, South Korea, for example, many of whom are highly dependent on the natural gas coming out of Qatar, which is, of course, slowed down significantly coming out of the Straits of Hormuz. So the U.S. is facing pressure from every angle, not to mention the domestic front, which I believe the regime is waiting for this moment in November to see if that pressure can actually stop the U.S. from continuing any sort of hostilities, which would actually create a special kind of status quo for the regime, which was actually a better status quo than it was before the war started for them.
And Jonathan, a lot of analysts describe this war as homemade, and these problems on this ship also sound homemade.
Right. So these issues on the ship, there are ways to deal with mental health issues on the ship. There are 5 mental health people on this particular vessel. There's a special community coordinator to help communicate between people, the families back home and the vessel. If these things are all working properly, they should be helpful. The challenge is when you extend them for this period of time, they're not designed for that, which means those resources begin to break down. They're not as reliable. And that also means the work product and the output of the individual sailors and Marines are not as reliable and not as high efficiency as one might expect in an earlier deployment. And so this is a kind of small microcosm of the larger conflict where those deployed even on the ground, let's say in Jordan, for example, or in Saudi Arabia, they're also extended for longer periods of time than they expected. And they've been hit with ballistic missiles and other drones and other, threatening materials from Iran during this period of time. This is going to be taking a toll on everyone, especially the lowest ranking people there, who are the ones every day out there sweating and working hard to try to make this machine move in a direction that we don't know where it's going.
Yeah, so we're not just talking about those on board this vessel. There are some 50,000 troops in the Middle East, I believe now, and thousands more being deployed. I mean, can the Navy sustain the operational tempo that's now being demanded of its forces?
At the current tempo, no. And in fact, the USS George Washington, it's en route right now, coming out of the Pacific. It just passed through the Straits of Malacca. This was a scheduled switch. It's supposed to relieve the Abraham Lincoln. So this wasn't something they just did because of the sailor morale issue on the Abraham Lincoln, but it's certainly a necessary movement that needs to happen immediately. And the problem is, we don't know if the George Washington will face the same extension that the Abraham Lincoln faced. And it sounds like the sailors on board the Lincoln were not told they would be on an extended deployment. This came later. So the sailors aboard the George Washington are also facing a similar future where they don't know if they're actually going to go home after 6 months or 7 months, or if they'll even come to port at all, whether that's in Oman or some other country in the Gulf. So there's a lot of uncertainty for those fresh sailors and Marines coming in as well.
And that uncertainty must make it extremely hard for these guys to stay focused. And then you've got the fatigue, the stress. I mean, does that all lead to, or can it lead to serious accidents on a flight deck?
Of course. And actually, the sailor that attempted to jump overboard and did jump overboard, he was in the water for about an hour, was a flight mechanic on the deck of this vessel. And he had communicated to his wife that he was concerned that his fatigue was actually leading to a breakdown in his ability to perform his job. He also told his superiors that he should be taken away from this position temporarily so that he could kind of recollect his thoughts. And apparently, according to the messages that he sent to his wife, he was yelled at for saying that. So adding insult to injury, not only was he already under pressure, now his superiors are telling him to just keep his mouth shut and continue. So there's a higher chance than usual of mishaps aboard a ship with that kind of culture.
What is it like working on deck? I was reading that during peak daylight hours, the deck crews can launch 2 aircraft and land one every 37 seconds. And at night, they rely entirely on precision guidance systems due to near zero visibility at sea, of course. And they're also working with bombs, missiles, ammunition.
Right. And this is just the air component that you're discussing. There's also a ground force component. There are Marines aboard as well. There's a landing force aboard. There is an intelligence component. There are 2 other aircraft or 2 other vessels that support the aircraft carrier that are always moving with it. And this takes a lot of coordination, a lot of leadership, and a lot of hard physical labor. And I think that's kind of the thing to underscore here is how much labor these individuals are exerting to keep this vessel afloat and moving in the way it's expected to move. And you're talking about thousands of people every day down on the hot, sweaty underbelly of this vessel and on the deck of this vessel during the day. It's extremely hot in the Gulf and very humid. There's nowhere for them to go take liberty to take a break, except on the same vessel they were just already sweating on. And you can imagine that morale will take quite a hit in such a long deployment with this kind of activity.
And you'd want to be not only well rested, but also well fed before operating an aircraft carrier. I mean, you wouldn't want a scant meal like the ones that we've seen published online. The photos that we've been looking at have been sent by a serving officer on board the USS Abraham Lincoln. Did these pictures bring back memories for you?
Absolutely. And the very important thing here is that because of the way rank is structured on a naval vessel, the lowest ranking folks who are putting out the most hard labor are getting fed the worst food. Those who have the higher ranks and higher status get the best food, the best living and sleeping conditions, whereas they're doing the least amount of physical labor. This is because the Navy is based on very deep traditional ways of life that are kind of different than how we are in the modern world. So there are actually strict separations on this vessel where the images of the food that you showed would be fed to the lower enlisted men and women who'd be working the hardest on this vessel, while folks up at the higher ranks would be sitting with orange juice and steak and very nice food at the exact same time that these others are sitting down there eating this food.
But did you ever have to ration food or did you run out of soap, deodorant, toothpaste? have to deal with broken toilets, mouldy showers, laundry outages, lack of hot water.
Absolutely. And it even gets worse than that, because if you're in wartime like this, you have to do something called hot racking, where you're actually swapping out and sleeping in somebody else's bed throughout the evening as you're moving through watch schedules. So not only that, you have no privacy. You have nothing that belongs to you. You're running out of supplies. You can't buy the basics. You can't even talk to your family because there's no Wi-Fi or internet or telephone on board. So these people are not even able to communicate with their families. And in fact, that sailor that jumped off the vessel, he had a child that was 6 months old, born while he was on the vessel. He's never met that child. So you can imagine he's one of probably many on that vessel. There's 5,000 people. I'm sure there are others who are having children born that they've never met, never even seen yet. So it's kind of all coming together and trickling down and really harming morale.
But Jonathan, let me get this right. Is this how things usually work on an aircraft carrier? I mean, is this the sort of thing you just have to put up with as a Marine or as a sailor?
There is a degree of grit that you have to deal with. However, this is a special situation. Normally, the vessel will come into port once a month. The port calls will be selected in such a way to actually allow the sailors and Marines to take some time off, some liberty aboard, on shore, and for example, in Thailand or in Singapore or in other countries along the way. So they actually get to go out and live a little bit. In this situation, that has not happened, and it's very unusual that they've not been able to get off the vessel and actually go out and clear their mind a little bit and then get back on the vessel. So this is not a common occurrence. And in fact, I believe not since 2003, the invasion of Iraq, was the last time that something like this happened at such an extended time period and with no liberty.
A 2025 study published in the journal Military Medicine found an inability to rest when needed. The noise, of course, is loud. We haven't mentioned that on an aircraft carrier, as you can imagine. And limited access to quality mental and physical health care ranked among the most distressing aspects of deployments. I mean, we're not even talking about war, are we, here? Or killing people or having to shoot at someone. We're talking about just getting a good night's sleep. This study concluded, given the high rates of military suicide, including within the Navy, efforts to improve healthcare access on ships are urgently needed. What would you say to that?
That's absolutely right. And problem with the way this is structured on the vessel, a lot of the healthcare is provided by enlisted service members who are themselves on the vessel, right? So you already have people who are under the same morale constraints acting as your first line health people. And there are only up to 5 actual mental health professionals aboard this vessel with 5,000 people. So you can imagine that even if those people were available to talk to, there would be quite a line of waiting to even get in front of a person like this. And we don't know how long that's taking. And also those people are on the vessel too. So everyone on the vessel is subjected to these difficult conditions. And you can only imagine how this is a kind of a systemic problem throughout the vessel.
Have you managed to speak to anyone aboard?
No, and I don't think anyone has, because they're not able to access Wi-Fi. And actually, during this time of conflict, even if they did have Wi-Fi, it would be heavily restricted, typically only when they're at port, and they'd have to pay a high amount of money to even use it. And that is not provided for free to them. So that would come out of their pocket to be able to use Wi-Fi to talk to anybody.
But you have no doubts about what's going on board this ship?
Oh, I think this is the tip of the iceberg, because what we're seeing are the published reports that are making it into the media. And having been on a vessel myself, it is very difficult over time to have a vessel operate completely at 100% efficiency without some kind of mishap, especially in a situation like this, without any time off, without any liberty, and not even knowing ahead of time that you were going to be extended for so long. So you couldn't even have brought materials to support yourself for that period of time. There's going to be more problems that are probably going to come to the surface.
It sounds like this is exactly what Iran's been waiting for.
Right. Iran very much understands that the information domain is a domain of warfare, and they've been exploiting that information domain, not just with this vessel situation, but also at the outset of the war. We all remember the Lego videos that the regime put out on X and other social media platforms, because they understood that it's not just the people on the ground that they're fighting, it's also the American people. And what better way to access that than directly through information?
I find it interesting that US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth how he commented on this. He was asked about conditions on the USS Lincoln and simply said that this was completely misrepresented. He said, "We make sure every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them with at every single moment. Some deployments are longer than others, and I have more respect and gratitude for those sailors than anybody." But added, deployments normally last 6 to 9 months and could be extended during war. What do you make of his response?
Well, the first thing that's kind of interesting to me is that he said at war. I question, did Congress say that we're at war? And that's, of course, an important question that everyone should be asking. What kind of conflict is this? How long will it last? And of course, he's never been on a vessel before. He's never served on a ship. He was not in the Navy. So he's hearing from others who are advising him on the conditions of the vessel, and he is saying those things that he's hearing. He's not basing it on experience or knowledge of what's actually happening. And I think if he took a tour of the vessel, things may be different. He may not say that, but he would probably understand better if he actually went and saw the conditions on this vessel.
There are some Democrats who want to get an investigative team onto the vessel, but I don't know about their chances of that. I also know the families held meetings with officials on Thursday. How has it got that far that mum and dad or worried wives have had to raise the alarm on this? Because I know there was public criticism about this back in April. Why hasn't this simply been fixed?
Well, it seems the Navy is very hesitant to kind of produce information on this situation. And we even saw that during the meeting that you just mentioned, where they claimed to not know for sure if the sailor fell off or jumped off intentionally, despite already having an investigation going on about the fact that he did intentionally jump off and was already on his way to San Diego for mental health care treatment. So it seems the Navy is trying to keep this out of the public view. But of course, when people try to keep things out of the public view, they often find their way out in the worst kind of way.
So just summing up, have Trump and Hegseth bitten off more than they can chew with this war?
It appears so. It appears that this war was hoped to be quick, and it is anything but quick. And it does not appear to have a clearly defined end state. We heard that it was about nuclear weapon disarmament. We heard that it was about intercontinental ballistic missile interdiction and reduction. And these things have changed over time to now just being about the straits. But it appears that even in that narrow definition of what this conflict is about, the straits are actually increasing in Iran's favor and decreasing in the favor of Western interests, especially the United States.
And Jonathan, have you got a message for those sailors on board holding out, not knowing when this is going to end?
I would say you're going to get liberty soon enough. It will come, and be patient as you can be. I know your patience is low, but it will be over soon.
Jonathan, thanks for your time. Marine Corps Special Operations veteran Jonathan Hackett there for us.
Thank you.
Well, the Navy says it's putting a priority on delivering mission-critical supplies to the ship. But what do you think the long deployment of the USS Lincoln tells us about how the US war on Iran is going? I'm Ben Fajzullin. Thanks for watching.